Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to challenge some really fundamental beliefs, to unearth truths about what genuinely impacts our health. And today, wow, we're tackling a big one. A belief so ingrained in modern medicine, it's practically dogma. The idea that high cholesterol is the main villain behind heart disease and statins, they're presented as our essential protectors. But what if? What if a lot of what we think we know about heart disease, about its treatment, isn't just a little off?
Mhm.
What if it's fundamentally, dramatically flawed? We're about to journey into an alternative view that's frankly pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, it's absolutely vital, isn't it? Especially now with so much information swirling around. We need to scrutinize these widely accepted facts, even the ones that seem foundational. So our mission today is really to look at all the evidence we can find, consider the often overlooked origins of some medical dogmas, and really dig into what this all means. For this deep dive, we're drawing on some really challenging material, specifically from a Midwestern doctor. It offers a profound reevaluation of cholesterol, heart disease, and the whole statin situation.
That's right. So our mission is to unpack this challenging perspective. The argument that cholesterol isn't the primary driver of heart disease, and that statins, these incredibly widely prescribed drugs, might not only be ineffective for many people, but could actually be harmful. We're going to explore alternative theories about heart disease, dig into the honestly fascinating and sometimes unsettling history of how certain beliefs took root, how they got so entrenched, and then really look at the implications for you, for your personal health, your choices, even for public health policy. Look, this isn't about telling you what to believe. It's about giving you the information so you can become well-informed, empowered to ask better questions about your own health. Okay, so let's start where most people are. The prevailing narrative, the one we've all kind of absorbed, it's simple, it's everywhere. It's basically the bedrock of modern cardiology. High cholesterol, especially LDL, causes cardiovascular disease. End of story, right? You go to the doctor, they run the test, numbers are high. Boom! Red flag. Big health problem. Often leads straight to talk about medication.
It's presented as this direct, undeniable link.
Exactly, but what's so striking in the material we're looking at today is how it immediately throws that into question.
Mm.
It contrasts this widespread belief with, a pretty startling claim, a claim that's deeply counterintuitive for most of us. The assertion is that a large body of evidence actually contradicts this direct link. And maybe even more surprising, the data presented suggests that lower cholesterol levels, believe it or not, are linked to an increased risk of death. I mean, that completely flips the script on what we've been taught for decades. And it immediately makes you ask how? How could this belief get so dominant if there's evidence challenging it?
It really is mind-bending when you think about it. We're constantly warned about high cholesterol being dangerous, but here's evidence suggesting the opposite might be true. And our source gives a really compelling example, a specific one. A 1986 study published in The Lancet, and that's, a top-tier, highly respected medical journal. This study, after extensive analysis, concluded quite clearly. Each 1 millimole increase in total cholesterol corresponded to a 15% decrease in mortality. Yeah. Decrease, not increase. That's not just a subtle difference. It's a fundamental challenge to the view you hear every day. It forces you to consider maybe the foundation of our understanding is built on, maybe misinterpretation or something else.
Right. And when you see contradictory evidence like that coming from such a credible source, it really should make us all pause, make us question the very basis of this belief. How did we get here? How did an entire medical paradigm influencing millions, billions in spending get built on a premise that, when you look closer, seems to have significant evidence stacked against it? And exploring how we got here, well, that's where the story gets even more complicated and, frankly, pretty disturbing.
Yeah, this leads us straight into what you could call a really contentious, maybe even scandalous chapter in medical history, the great sugar versus fat debate. Think back to the 1960s, 70s. A fierce scientific battle was raging. On one side, John Yudkin, a British scientist, he was making a strong case that sugar was the real problem, the main driver of heart disease.
He had compelling evidence linking sugar intake to metabolic issues, heart problems.
Exactly. And on the other side, Ansel Keys, an American physiologist, he was adamant, blaming saturated fat and cholesterol. It was a real clash of titans with huge stakes for public health.
And, well, history shows Ansel Keys basically won that debate, largely because his 7-country study became so widely accepted it became nutritional dogma. He presented data that seemed to show this clear, linear link between eating saturated fat and heart disease rates across different countries. But, and this is crucial, as our source points out, the critical flaw was that the study's results were essentially a product of the countries Keys chose.
He cherry-picked them.
Pretty much, a classic example. The source illustrates it perfectly. Pick a different set of countries. Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, France, Sweden, equally valid choices. And you'd find the opposite conclusion about saturated fat and heart disease. It completely undermines his whole argument. It wasn't objective science, it was selective presentation.
And it gets even worse, doesn't it? The rabbit hole goes deeper. Our source points to this unearthed, previously unpublished study, a 56-month randomized controlled trial. And guess who was the lead investigator? Ansel Keys himself. This wasn't some small thing. It was rigorous, done in mental hospitals, nursing homes, where they could control diets precisely.
So what did it find?
It found that replacing animal fats with vegetable oil did lower cholesterol. Okay, fine. But here's the kicker, the really inconvenient part. For every 30-point drop in cholesterol, the risk of death increased by 10%. Increased. Your chance of dying went up when cholesterol went down.
Wow. And that wasn't just a one-off, was it? A blip in the data?
Apparently not. The source also mentions a similar study from the 70s, also unpublished. 458 Australians, same idea. Replace saturated fat with vegetable oils. Result, it increased their risk of dying by 17.6%. Significantly.
So you have these major findings contradicting the narrative Keys was pushing, and they just disappear. They get suppressed.
That's what it looks like. How does that happen? How do findings like that, especially from studies Keys himself was involved in, get buried? It points to some powerful forces at play, beyond just pure science.
It really does. Okay, let's unpack this because, like you said, it sounds less like a simple scientific disagreement and more like, well, like something else entirely. We're talking about evidence, inconvenient evidence, potentially being actively suppressed or just ignored, a deliberate shaping of medical fact.
Exactly. And what's fascinating and deeply concerning is how external forces, particularly money, can apparently shape what becomes accepted truth in medicine, even when the evidence points elsewhere or is actively hidden, as we're seeing here. And this isn't just ancient history. It connects directly to recent disclosures. We now know it's documented the sugar industry used bribes, funding, to influence scientists to push the blame for heart disease onto fact.
Right, effectively sidelining Yudkin's work on sugar. It was an active campaign.
And here's the kicker for you listening. Even though it's now generally accepted that Yudkin was right, I mean, we see the anti-sugar message everywhere now. Our current medical guidelines for heart disease, they're still largely based on Keys' discredited work. That's incredible inertia. So the dietary advice you get, the doctor's recommendations, how heart disease is fundamentally viewed and treated, it's still operating under this old, flawed, possibly manipulated paradigm. That directly impacts you.
It's a deeply problematic situation. You have public health advice affecting millions, billions of dollars built on this shaky foundation. And this flawed foundation led to another pattern we see in medicine, the number game, and the explosive growth of statin prescriptions that followed. The pattern is pretty clear. Find a drug that changes a number, like cholesterol. Then medical guidelines slowly shift to prioritize treating that number, which inevitably means more and more people are told they need the drug.
And statins are the perfect example, aren't they? Before they came along, late 80s, lowering cholesterol reliably was hard. Older drugs weren't great. But once statins hit the market, suddenly there was this rush. A flood of research rapidly emerged, stating that cholesterol was more and more dangerous.
Right. And hence that more and more people needed to be on statins. It basically created its own market, fueled by this narrative.
And the numbers are just staggering. Look at the U.S. 2008, 2009, about 12% of adults over 40 were on statins. Significant, but okay. Fast forward to 10 years, 2018, 2019, that number jumped to 35%. Nearly 3 times as many people in just a decade, tens of millions.
And the money involved. Globally, over $1 trillion spent on statins to date. $1 trillion. This massive expansion means a huge chunk of the population is directly affected by these drugs, by this cholesterol theory. It's not just academic, it's a massive public health and economic issue affecting you.
So this huge growth, this massive spending, it leads to a really basic question, doesn't it? But one our source says is remarkably difficult to answer clearly. How much actual benefit do statins produce for the patient? The fact that that question is hard to answer transparently, that alone feels like a red flag.
It really does. And the reasons why it's so hard are, well, concerning. Published studies, especially the big ones, often use confusing metrics to obfuscate their data. Basically, ways of presenting the numbers that make the benefits look bigger than they are, almost certainly inflating them. But even more alarming, according to the source, is that virtually all of the data on statin therapy is kept by a private research collaboration.
Funded by.
Heavily pharmaceutical funded. This group consistently publishes glowing reviews, attacks critics, and here's the key part. refuses to release their data to outside researchers
Mm.
for independent analysis. That lack of transparency is a huge problem in science. It's a barrier to finding the objective truth.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because when you start peeling back those layers, the carefully managed data, the PR, that whole miracle drug story for statins just starts to crumble. You find a lot of smoke and mirrors. So when independent researchers did manage to look at the publicly available data, the stuff that was likely already inflated, what did they find?
Well, the impact on how long people lived was tiny. Taking a statin daily for about 5 years resulted in living, on average, only 3 to 4 days longer.
Days.
3 to 4 days. And it gets worse. The source points out that large trials have found this minuscule benefit is only seen in men. For women, maybe even less benefit, maybe none at all in terms of living longer. You have to ask, is that worth it?
That pattern. Exaggerated claims, hidden data, it sounds familiar. The source draws a parallel to the Pfizer COVID vaccine trial. Remember the headlines? 95% effective everywhere.
Right. But the source points out, when you actually broke down the numbers, it meant a 0.8% reduction in minor symptoms and a tiny 0.037% reduction in severe symptoms. Meaning you had to vaccinate 119 people to stop one minor case and over 2,700 people to stop one severe case. Plus, the whistleblower revelations about inflated figures, efficacy waning quickly, it's a recurring pattern, isn't it? Bold claims up front, but the real-world benefit, when scrutinized, is often much, much smaller. It's deeply concerning.
It definitely raises big questions about transparency and, frankly, integrity, especially when the data is controlled so tightly. And this leads us right into conflicts of interest, how guidelines get shaped at the highest levels. The source puts it bluntly, chillingly. When you have an unsafe and ineffective but highly lucrative drug must be sold, what's the next step?
Typically to pay everyone off to promote it. It's a bold claim, but the source backs it up.
Okay, let's look at the evidence presented. The National Cholesterol Education Program, the NCEP. This was the big group tasked by the NIH to create the National Cholesterol Guidelines for the U.S. Hugely influential.
And the source reveals something shocking about its makeup. Excluding the chair, who couldn't have conflicts by law, the other 8 members were on the payroll of 6 statin manufacturers. Not just 1 or 2, but systemic influence from multiple companies right at the heart of the guideline committee.
And surprise, surprise, this NCEP recommended aggressive LDL lowering for huge numbers of people.
Now, contrast that directly with what an independent group found. A Canadian division of the Cochrane Collaboration, highly respected, known for rigorous, unbiased reviews. Crucially, these researchers were not paid by drug companies. They looked at the exact same statin trials. Their conclusion,
Completely different.
totally different. They stated quite clearly, statins have not been shown to provide an overall health benefit in primary prevention trials. Same data, opposite conclusions. The key difference, potential financial influence. It really speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And this pattern isn't isolated. The source draws another parallel to the COVID-19 treatment guidelines. It mentions the panel was handpicked by Fauci, included academics taking money from the makers of remdesivir, which seemed to ensure votes against cheaper, non-patentable options.
It suggests a troubling systemic issue. Financial incentives potentially overriding objective science and public health recommendations. And that impacts millions.
And it's not just the guidelines, it's the tools doctors use every day, like the American College of Cardiology's risk calculator. Doctors plug in your numbers, it spits out your 10-year risk of heart attack or stroke, often leads straight to a statin prescription.
But our source highlights a major study by Kaiser Permanente back in 2016. They found this calculator overestimated the risk of these events by 600%.
600%, that's huge.
Massive.
Yeah.
Yet despite this, it's still widely used, even tested on medical students for their board exams.
So think about the implications for you. If the risk assessment tools are flawed, overstating your danger by that much, and the guidelines doctors follow are potentially biased by financial ties,
then you could easily end up on unnecessary, expensive medication based on faulty information. It's not abstract. It directly affects your health, your wallet, your choices.
which leads us to this phenomenon the source calls the statin denier label and the suppression of dissent that surrounds it. Despite all this evidence we're discussing, many doctors deeply, truly believe in the profound benefits of statins.
Some are even quoted advocating for statins to be added to the drinking water supply, which sounds extreme, but it shows the depth of the conviction.
And this intense belief, the source argues, has created a kind of cancel culture. Anyone questioning statins, presenting contradictory data, immediately labeled a statin denier. accused of being a mass murderer for potentially steering people away from treatment.
And then effectively canceled from mainstream medical discussion. It creates this climate of fear, stifles open debate, makes it hard for safety concerns or alternative views to even get a hearing.
The source highlights Dr. Aseem Malhotra, a British cardiologist who spoke out against statins and also COVID vaccines on platforms like Joe Rogan. He talks about this dirty industry, the remarkable parallels in how narratives are protected.
And he revealed something incredible. That same statin research collaboration, the one insisting side effects were under 1%, they also created a genetic test. And in the marketing for that test, they stated that 29% of all statin users were likely to experience side effects.
29%.
Yeah.
Compared to their public claim of less than 1%.
Exactly. And then when this contradiction was pointed out, they quietly removed that 29% figure from the marketing. It's a direct admission of a much higher harm rate.
And the consequences for patients caught in the middle. They can be severe. The source mentions doctors sometimes retaliate against patients who refuse statins. Similar, it suggests, to how some unvaccinated patients reported being treated during COVID.
And there are wider pressures, too. Employers requiring safe cholesterol numbers, life insurance policies penalizing you for unsafe numbers. It's coercive.
So what does this all mean for you? It sounds like a powerful system, financial, social, professional, protecting this narrative. Punishing dissent. It's not just a simple medical recommendation. It's this whole ecosystem of influence and control affecting your life, your autonomy.
And this immense pressure to prescribe and take statins, regardless of the evidence or patient experience, brings us to the author's main, most urgent concern. They state it clearly. The primary issue isn't just the billions wasted each year on a potentially useless therapy, though that's bad enough, about $25 billion a year in the U.S. alone. No, the real issue, far more critical, is the fact that they have a very high rate of injury. This shifts it from financial waste to actual human suffering.
And when we say high rate of injury, what kind of numbers are we talking about?
Existing studies cited find anywhere between 5% and 30% of users experience injuries. Dr. Malhotra, who we mentioned, estimates 20% of statin users are injured by them.
1 in 5. That's not a rare side effect. That's common. Given the millions taking these drugs, that's a huge number of people being harmed.
It is, and it's not just statistics. It has real-world impact on people's lives, their quality of life. The source cites studies showing incredibly high numbers of people stopping the drugs because of side effects. One study found nearly 45% of older adults stopped within a year. Another, covering all adults, found 47%, almost half stopped within a year. For you listening, this isn't trivial. It's a massive burden of suffering, a real challenge to daily life for millions. It's the human cost.
Okay, so let's get specific about these injuries. The source breaks them down. Those perceived by the patient, the ones you feel directly and the ones not overtly noticed, the more insidious ones. So the perceived ones, impacting daily life, we're talking a high rate of muscle pain, often severe fatigue, especially when you exert yourself, muscle inflammation, even autoimmune muscle damage in some cases.
But it's not just physical discomfort, is it?
No, the neurological and psychiatric effects are really alarming, often dismissed. Perceived side effects also include significant depression, confusion, aggression, really debilitating memory loss, severe irritability, sleep problems, all sorts of musculoskeletal issues, joint pain, tendon problems.
And even things like sudden hearing loss, sensorineural hearing loss, and ongoing stomach issues, gastrointestinal distress. These are the things patients feel, the things that make them question the drug.
Right, and then maybe even more worrying are the injuries not overtly noticed. The harm happening inside without you necessarily connecting it to the statin.
This list is long and deeply concerning. Increased risk of type 2 diabetes, especially in women. Various cancers, liver problems, even liver failure, cataracts, and terrifying neurological conditions like ALS-like syndromes, other motor disorders like Parkinson's, cerebellar ataxia affecting coordination.
The list keeps going. Lupus-like syndrome, increased susceptibility to shingles, that herpes zoster virus, interstitial cystitis, polymyalgia rheumatica, kidney injury, even renal failure.
And the author makes a really sharp point here. They observe that if you see a cluster of severe reactions reported, it probably means far more less severe reactions are occurring as well, just maybe not reported or connected. And conversely, if you see a large number of less severe reactions, like muscle aches, you can predict far more severe injuries are lurking in the background, currently unrecognized.
So the true scope of the harm might be even bigger than we realize.
Which brings us to this whole issue of medical gaslighting, often disguised with the term nocebo effect, and the incredible resistance from doctors to acknowledge these injuries. The author talks about their own experience and practice. Patients consistently reporting numbness, muscle weakness, pain, cognitive fog that started with the statin. And crucially, these symptoms resolved quickly when they stopped the drug. The pattern was clear to the patients.
Yet the typical doctor response, described as extremely hostile, insisting the statin could not be causing the symptom, often saying, well, in all my years, I've never seen a patient injured by a statin. This belief leads them to insist the patient must stay on the drug even if it's causing misery.
And this is where nocebo comes in handy for them. Citing studies like one from 2016 suggesting the muscle pain, other symptoms are best explained by the nocebo effect, meaning patients were basically tricked into imagining the injury, the proposed solution. Just tell them the symptoms are in their head.
The author found that just remarkable and deeply flawed. Why? Because, as they point out, many patients had no idea muscle pain or cognitive issues were even linked to statins until they felt them. They experienced the symptom first, then maybe researched it. So how could it be negative expectation if they had no expectation?
Right. It sounds much more like a real side effect being dismissed. The author also suggests this gap between patient experience and doctor denial could be because the clinical trials doctors rely on, well, they're always funded by the pharmaceutical industry and hence consistently cover up injuries. That potential for bias is always there.
This resistance creates such a difficult situation for patients suffering real harm. The author shares stories of arguing with relatives' doctors, often cardiologists. These specialists would dismiss his informed medical opinion, insist they knew the data much better, and just put the relative back on the statin, often refusing to even look at literature detailing the harms.
It shows this incredible institutional inertia, maybe even willful blindness.
And this whole pattern, pushing the drug, dismissing complaints, the source draws that powerful, uncomfortable parallel again. If you take this story and replace statin with COVID-19 vaccines, you will see it is essentially what everyone has experienced over the last 3 years.
Yeah, the source uses that comparison not to take a side on vaccines specifically, but to highlight what it sees as a consistent playbook, promoting profitable drugs, managing perception, suppressing inconvenient reports of harm.
Which brings us to a really personal, poignant story. Dr. Dwayne Graveline, a family doctor who became an expert on statin dangers because he lived through them.
He was put on a statin like so many others, and soon after developed global amnesia, complete memory loss. His own neurologist scoffed. Statins do not do that. Just reinforcing how deep this belief runs, even among specialists.
What happened next is terrifying. Graveline stopped the statin, recovered. But then, maybe persuaded by colleagues, maybe his own curiosity, he tried it again.
And he again descended into the black pit of amnesia, this time for 12 hours, and with a retrograde loss of memory back to his high school days. Imagine that, losing hours of your present life, decades of your past. Twice, from a drug meant to help. It really personalizes the term side effect.
And what Graveline later uncovered about this, it's truly shocking. It speaks volumes about the system.
He found out that Pfizer management, the makers of Lipitor, knew about the cognitive impact over a decade ago during the first human use trial, their own data. Out of about 2,500 patients in that initial trial, 7 experienced transient global amnesia attacks and 4 others experienced other forms of severe memory disturbances. 11 cases total. Significant.
But did they warn anyone?
No. Not one word of warning of this was transmitted to the thousands of physicians who soon would be dispensing the drug to millions.
It's just deeply unsettling how deep this resistance to inconvenient truths runs, especially within medicine itself. How safety data can apparently be suppressed. What happened to open inquiry, transparency, informed consent?
Dr. Graveline, who was previously extremely fit, developed chronic exhaustion after all this. He dedicated himself to researching and writing about statin injuries, authoring the Statin Damage Crisis. His story really puts a human face on these often dismissed harms, turns data into lived, harrowing experience.
So given this huge range of injuries, these personal stories, the crucial question is why? Why do statins cause such widespread harm?
Right. The source explains they work by inhibiting an enzyme, HMG-CoA reductase, needed for cholesterol production. Okay. But here's the key insight. Blocking that enzyme disrupts a variety of other vital physiologic processes, too. It's not a surgical strike on just cholesterol. So, to understand statin toxicity, you have to understand what happens when all these other essential compounds reliant on the same pathway also get depleted.
It's a cascade effect, not just lowering a number. Let's start with cholesterol itself, the supposed villain. It actually has vital roles. It's a precursor for critical hormones, sex hormones, adrenal hormones, and crucially brain function. The synapses where memories form, Nerve cells communicate. They need cholesterol.
And here's the important part. Cholesterol from your blood doesn't easily get into the brain. The brain has to make its own. Specialized cells, glial cells, synthesize it right there.
And that's a huge problem with statins. They inhibit this internal brain cholesterol production by glial cells.
Which explains why cognition, in turn, is highly dependent upon cholesterol. The source gives examples of the cognitive harm. One study found minor cognitive impairment could be detected in 100% of statin users if sufficiently sensitive testing was done. Suggests it's widespread, even if subtle.
In the more severe effects we heard about, amnesia, like Dr. Graveline experienced, forgetfulness, confusion, disorientation, even faster onset of senility. The impact on thinking can be devastating.
And the author makes that heartbreaking point again. How often a patient's rapid descent into dementia after a statin is started is much too often written off by their doctor as senile brain changes or beginning Alzheimer's. When the real culprit might be the statin itself, they're left suffering, still taking the drug, causing the decline.
And the source notes that similar rapid cognitive decline, seen with some COVID vaccines, was also often dismissed as just their age, ignored. A pattern of dismissing potential drug effects.
Beyond direct cognition, the source mentions studies linking low or lowered cholesterol to violence, another worrying behavioral link, and that statin dementia is often characterized by aggression, fitting that pattern. Plus, the link to ALS-like symptoms also curiously seen with COVID vaccines, another pattern noted.
Can people recover?
Some improvement is seen when the statin is stopped, but the source warns cognitive decline can, unfortunately, be persistent for many, potential permanent damage.
It really is like knocking over the first domino, isn't it? Block one pathway and problems spread through the body. And maybe the most talked about reason for statin side effects is CoQ10 deficiency, coenzyme Q10.
Right. Absolutely essential nutrient. Vital for two things mainly. Mitochondria, the energy factories in our cells, and for the stability, the integrity of cell walls everywhere.
And this CoQ10 deficiency, directly caused because statins block the pathway that makes both cholesterol and CoQ10, is generally considered the most common cause of their side effects.
And here's the tragic irony the source points out. Those side effects could have been prevented if CoQ10 had been given with the statin, just supplemented alongside it, but that's unlikely to happen routinely. Why? Because doing so would be equivalent to an admission that statins could cause harm, a narrative the industry carefully avoids.
So what happens when CoQ10 levels drop? Energy-related problems, because the mitochondria suffer.
Yeah, the list is long. Mitochondrial damage itself, profound lack of energy, chronic fatigue syndrome, even congestive heart failure, fluid retention, shortness of breath, gout, really debilitating stuff.
And the problems from weakened cell walls.
Things like hepatitis, liver inflammation. And the source notes the threshold for diagnosing statin-induced liver damage was actually raised after reports became common, making it harder to diagnose. Convenient. Also, pancreatitis, inflammation of the pancreas. Rhabdomyolysis, that rapid, dangerous breakdown of muscle tissue, and widespread tendon and ligament inflammation, even rupture, painful, disabling. The source links this to mitochondrial damage too, similar to issues seen with certain antibiotics that harm mitochondria.
And beyond those, two of the absolute most common issues from CoQ10 depletion.
Myopathy, that's the muscle pain, tiredness, weakness, cramps. And peripheral neuropathy, numbness, tingling, burning, usually in hands and feet. A lot of this myopathy goes undetected clinically because you need muscle biopsies, which are rarely done, so the problem just continues.
And is it permanent?
For many, tragically, yes. One expert cited found it permanent in 68% of her patients. Dr. Graveline estimated 25% from his observations. And often these conditions, the myopathy, the neuropathy, they keep getting worse even after you stop the statin, suggests lasting, irreversible damage.
And then there's the whole issue with diabetics. Statins are pushed aggressively on them, right? Because they're seen as high risk for heart disease.
Yeah, but the absurdity, as the source highlights, is that statins are also well known to significantly increase your risk of diabetes in the first place, likely by messing with mitochondria and insulin sensitivity.
It's a completely counterproductive, worsening the condition you're supposedly trying to protect them from.
Exactly, and especially worrying for diabetics who are already prone to nerve damage. One study found that for long-term statin users, the risk of neuropathy shot up 14 to 26 times. It makes the rationale for pushing statins so hard on this group really questionable. It's also ironic, the source notes, that CoQ10 itself is actually considered one of the more helpful supplements for preventing heart disease generally, a potential natural aid.
Okay, so beyond cholesterol and CoQ10, there are other, less famous ways statins cause harm. Dolichols, what are those?
Yeah, they're largely unknown compounds, but apparently they play a pivotal role in synthesizing proteins, the body's building blocks. And according to Dr. Gravline, they're especially key for neuropeptides, those chemical messengers involved in thoughts, emotions, sensations. Statins block their production too, causing major issues.
Like what kind of issues?
Well, dolichol problems have been linked to Alzheimer's. High concentrations are found where Parkinson's develops. Gravline argued dolichol inhibition is behind many neuropsychiatric symptoms: aggression, hostility, irritability, road rage, homicidal ideation, worsening addiction, depression, suicides. It raises that question again, doesn't it? How many dismissed symptoms could be linked back to these deep biochemical disruptions?
Then there's tau protein. Gravline theorized that because statins mess with mevalonate synthesis, that same pathway tau protein production would also be altered.
And abnormal tau protein is linked to a whole host of neurological disorders: Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, ALS, MS-Seconds. It offers a potential explanation for that cluster of diseases seen with statins.
And finally, selenoproteins.
Right. Deficiency of these proteins, which contain selenium, has been proven to cause both myopathies, muscle problems, and cognitive dysfunction. It all links back, reinforcing the idea that statins harm through multiple interconnected pathways. It's far more complex than just lowering cholesterol.
This huge list of harms leads to what the source calls the NFKB paradox. The idea is maybe the tiny cardiovascular benefit sometimes seen with statins isn't from lowering cholesterol at all.
Exactly. Maybe it's because they have anti-inflammatory properties. They inhibit NFKB, a key immune system regulator involved in inflammation. They also lower C-reactive protein, another inflammatory marker. So any benefit might just be from tamping down inflammation, not touching cholesterol levels.
But there's a major downside to that anti-inflammatory effect, right?
A huge one. Suppressing NFKB means suppressing your immune system generally, leads to reduced protection from infectious disease.
Yeah.
But the more significant issue is that NFKB inhibition appears to be linked to cancer, a deeply concerning trade-off.
Is there evidence for that link?
Yes. Japanese research found 13.3% of patients with certain lymphoid cancers had used statins versus only 7.3% of controls. A significant association.
And the PROSPER trial, that big statin trial,
Showed a small reduction in heart attack deaths. Yes, 28 fewer deaths in the statin group. But, and this is the part often ignored, that benefit was neutralized by a higher risk of dying from cancer. There were 24 more cancer deaths in the statin group. Non-fatal cancers also went up significantly, so any heart benefit was potentially wiped out by increased cancer risk.
The source draws that parallel again to what was seen with the COVID vaccines, where a claimed benefit in preventing one thing might have been outweighed by harms like heart attacks or strokes, but only the benefit was highlighted.
Right. It highlights a pattern of potentially masking or deflecting from serious harms by focusing only on a narrow purported benefit. The source does mention one potential exception: statins possibly preventing fatal prostate cancer, maybe due to blocking hormone production, but the overall cancer picture is very worrying.
Okay, let's step back and unpack this dominant image we all have of heart disease. For so long, we've seen it as a plumbing problem. Fat clogging the arteries, much like they do for a drain pipe. It's a simple, remarkably persuasive marketing slogan. Easy to grasp, easy to visualize.
Yeah, easy to sell solutions for, too.
Exactly. But given everything we've discussed, the weak link between cholesterol and heart disease, the harms of the supposed fix, is that analogy even accurate? Or is it fundamentally misleading?
Well, our source introduces Malcolm Kendrick, a doctor and author who asked exactly that. He looked for a different explanation, a common thread among all the known risk factors, things actually proven to associate with heart disease.
This clogged pipe idea is powerful, but maybe too simple, right? Kendrick, according to the source, argues for a completely different model. One the medical profession has largely buried or ignored, but which might actually fit the evidence better.
Right. And this alternative model totally shifts the chicken or the egg scenario. Plaques aren't the cause initiated by cholesterol. They become a sign of the body's ongoing repair process, a consequence of something else.
So let's walk through Kendrick's model: blood vessel damage and repair. Step 1.
Blood vessels get damaged, not necessarily major trauma, but sustained low-level injury to the inner lining, the endothelium.
That's step 2.
The body tries to fix it. Like any injury, it forms tiny blood clots over the damaged area, a natural protective response.
Step 3.
As these clots heal, organize, they get pulled inside the vessel wall under that endothelial lining, and a new layer of lining tries to grow over the top, sealing it off.
And step 4.
This happens over and over in the same spot. Repeated damage, repeated repair. The accumulated stuff under the lining of the plaque gets bigger, more complex, more abnormal. So plaques aren't fatty deposits from the blood. They're healed, internalized blood clots from chronic injury.
And the evidence supporting this model. The source says it's compelling, fits observations better.
Yes. For instance, most known heart disease risk factors, smoking, high blood pressure, stress, are things you'd expect to directly damage that blood vessel lining. Makes sense. Also, plaques tend to form at junctions where arteries branch. Why? That's where blood flow is turbulent, creating the most shear stress, the most physical wear and tear. And crucially, when you look at plaques under a microscope, they contain the same stuff found in blood clots. Strong evidence of their origin.
Here's another huge point challenging the old view. The source says, there is no established mechanism for how cholesterol from the bloodstream can get under the endothelium to start a plaque in a healthy vessel.
Right. The dominant theory relies on bad cholesterol somehow breaking through that barrier, but physiologically, how does that actually happen easily? It's not clear.
But Kendrick's model has an answer.
Yes. Red blood cells, they're obviously in the bloodstream, central to clots, and they contain huge amounts of cholesterol. About half the total cholesterol in your blood is inside red blood cells. So when a clot forms to repair damage, red blood cells and their cholesterol get incorporated directly into the clot and thus into the vessel wall.
And the type of cholesterol found in plaques.
It contains lots of cholesterol crystals. These can only form from free cholesterol, the type abundant in red blood cells, not the type carried in LDL lipoproteins. Much of the cholesterol in plaques is this free cholesterol matching the red blood cell origin story.
What about lipoproteins in plaques?
The main ones found aren't LDL, but lipoprotein A, LPA. The body actually uses LPA to help repair arterial walls. High LPA levels are linked to a threefold increased risk of heart attack stroke. Why? Because it makes repair clots harder to break down, ensuring they get stuck under the lining and become plaques.
And that old idea that fatty streaks on healthy vessels are the start of plaques.
Extensively researched, apparently, and that progression was never observed to occur. Another blow to the conventional theory. These streaks might just be incidental.
Okay, so if we connect these dots, Kendrick's model really flips the script. Plaques are the result of damage and repair, not the initial cause driven by blood fat.
Exactly. Which brings us to that hypocrisy issue. Correlation is not causation, a vital scientific principle. But the source argues our whole heart disease model is built on correlations mistakenly treated as causation, often because it serves financial interests.
And the hypocrisy is glaring. Correlation is not causation, is used rigorously to shoot down challenges to dogma.
But, as the source puts it, overtly false correlations that support the medical industry's bottom line get treated as unquestionable dogmas, a self-serving double standard.
The source used the example of vaccines and infectious diseases. Vaccines helped, of course, but
It is seldom mentioned that some of the deadliest diseases, for e.g. scarlet fever, which had no vaccine, also disappeared around the same time, likely due to public health improvements, or that other diseases were already disappearing once the vaccines were introduced, thanks to sanitation, clean water, nutrition.
the source argues the vaccination industry essentially stole the credit from public health pioneers, an example of correlation being spun into causation for gain.
Bringing it back to heart disease, Kendrick concludes the true risk factors are things associated with damage to the blood vessels and impaired microcirculation, things like chronic inflammation, lupus, or high-stress hormones, cortisol.
So what does this all mean for you listening? It means look beyond the simple stories. Understand the complex factors, and be critical of narratives that seem to benefit specific industries more than they offer a complete picture of health.
So Kendrick's model, while disagreeing on the cause, not cholesterol, does agree with the conventional view on the result. Cardiovascular disease happens when the endothelium, the vessel lining, gets damaged and stops working properly, like losing its ability to secrete nitric oxide, which keeps vessels open and healthy.
But the key difference is what causes that damage. Kendrick says it's not cholesterol, it's inflammation, prolonged and severe stress from mental illness, smoking, even social oppression. These things directly harm the endothelium over time.
So his model focuses on treating the functional problems like fixing low nitric oxide, reducing inflammation, rather than just lowering a cholesterol number that might be irrelevant to the actual damage. Get to the root cause.
It's also interesting that statins do have some anti-inflammatory effects, increase nitric oxide a bit.
Right. And the source suggests it's Very likely that many of the small benefits attributed to statins are a result of these effects rather than their lowering of blood cholesterol. It reframes any benefit observed. It's not proof the cholesterol theory is right. It might be an unrelated side effect of the drug that could be achieved differently, maybe more safely.
And because Kendrick wasn't fixated only on cholesterol, his model opened the door to seeing other factors which may be playing an immense but largely unappreciated role in heart disease.
Exactly. Factors the cholesterol-centric view just misses. Environmental, systemic things.
Like fine particulate matter. We know smoking causes heart disease, but why?
It's repeatedly demonstrated that fine particulate matter, abundant in smoke, directly causes these changes, damages the endothelium. And it's not just cigarettes. Same damage from pollution particles in coal mines, crowded cities, from cooking with wood stoves indoors, from wildfire smoke. It broadens the risk factors way beyond just personal habits.
And then there's lead exposure. Lead is quite damaging to the endothelium.
Think about its history. Widespread in gasoline for decades. Phased out mostly, but still used in aviation fuel, race cars. And the source notes this correlation. Heart disease exploded in America after we started using it, heavily in gasoline.
The numbers linked to lead are terrifying. Around 400,000 deaths each year in America are due to lead exposure. High levels increase death risk over 700% in one study.
There's even a theory that lead absorbed years ago, slowly leaching from bones, could be a key cause of aging and related diseases like heart disease.
And why don't we hear more about these massive factors? Pollution, lead.
The source offers a stark reason. As you cannot sell drugs for any of these causes of heart disease, they rarely get mentioned. Instead, almost all of the research and discussions on heart disease are directed at cholesterol, because cholesterol drugs are incredibly profitable. It shows how the profit motive can steer the entire conversation.
So what does this wider perspective mean for you? It means looking beyond the headlines, beyond single-target drugs. It highlights how crucial environmental factors, systemic issues are for your health.
And that knowledge empowers you to think about prevention differently. To focus on lifestyle changes, environmental changes that target the root causes of vascular damage, not just a number that might be a red herring. It shifts the power back to you.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've seriously questioned the cholesterol hypothesis, looked at the evidence contradicting it. We've explored the minimal benefits and, frankly, extensive harms linked to statins for many people.
Right.
And we've introduced this whole alternative model heart disease as a process of damage and repair, not just clogged pipes.
And throughout, we've seen how financial interests, historical biases, might have really shaped what we consider medical fact.
This deep dive was all about giving you a different lens, a way to see this accepted paradigm through fresh, critical eyes, using information that's often buried.
Yeah, and our hope is really that this encourages you to always evaluate information critically, especially when it's presented as unquestionable dogma by powerful sources. Seek out different perspectives, question the assumptions, understand the potential biases, financial, institutional, that can color health claims. The goal isn't just passive listening, it's active, critical thinking, so you can be truly informed, truly empowered in your own health decisions.
So what does this all mean for you now that you've journeyed with us through this, questioning decades of medical wisdom? Understanding these deeper mechanisms, the real causes of arterial damage, the forces shaping medical practice, the potential harms of common drugs, it empowers you. Empowers you to make more informed choices about prevention, about treatment, empowers you to advocate for yourself, for your own health.
It's about shifting from being just a recipient of information to being an engaged, critical participant in your own well-being.
And maybe, just maybe, contributing to a future where we approach these complex chronic diseases with more nuance, more honesty, and ultimately more effectiveness.